Welcome to the Transport Leaders podcast, where we discuss the breakthrough ideas and bold solutions transforming the future of transport around the world. Join a global community of transport leaders, professionals, academics, and advocates as we unpack transport's toughest challenges and spotlight the challenges driving real change. From system reform levers and political realities to sustainability and technological disruption, experienced transport professionals Graham McCabe and Russell King and their guests offer expert perspectives as we discuss ways to transform our transport systems.
G'day, I'm Graham McCabe. I'm founder of Step Advisory, a transport planning traffic engineering firm, and I've worked in consultancy and government for over 25 years across Australia and Australasia.
And hello, I'm Russell King. I'm a transport strategist and the founder of the Transport Leader blog and newsletter. I've worked on the policy side of transport for around 20 years.
Okay, Russell, what are we going to talk about today?
Graham, today we're going to talk about our review of 2025 in a few key areas and our predictions for 2026. So we're going to have a chat about autonomous vehicles. We're going to have a chat about bikelash. And we're going to have a chat about road user charging.
Okay, so it's been, I suppose, a bit of a middling year in terms of transport around the world. A lot of projects being delivered. Rollout of autonomous vehicles is continuing with its hiccups. But always being on the downer side of life. Let's talk about the hiccups rather than the good. We'll start with that, with autonomous vehicles.
Well, just as we're recording, there's been a hiccup in the last sort of 48 hours of significantly noticed, which is San Francisco's power went down, including its telecoms network. And we had some challenges with Waymo, who are the big autonomous vehicle provider in San Francisco. Basically, their cars froze in the middle of the streets, causing traffic chaos on what was already chaos because all of the power had gone down.
Yeah.
Is that a fair summary?
This is a really interesting one because these companies don't employ traffic engineers. They employ software people and they run algorithms. So they use real-world drivers and to record what their behaviors and apply artificial intelligence over that in order to tell the vehicles what to do. So historically, they went from having somebody in the car to having safety observers watching on computers to having reducing the number of safety observers. So a human driver, when the signals are blacked out, will understand what road rules take over. So in many parts of the world, you may have a sign that says stop if the signals are blacked out associated with the traffic lights, and that says you don't have priority anymore. And failing that, the priority defaults to normal road user behavior. So if you're at a T intersection, then the people on the terminating leg, the leg that finishes, have to give way to the people on the continuing leg, unless there's some other form of road marking. So if you don't have people who understand and create the rules for traffic involved in the programming of these vehicles, then they don't know what to do when the thing that they've been trained on is no longer there.
Yeah. So clearly this was something's gone wrong in terms of their contingency planning for Waymo on this.
But it was a foreseeable failure. I mean, traffic lights being blacked out is a common activity.
Yeah, but I think it seems to be more than that, because also I think their backup plan for that was that one of the remote operators would take over, right?
When your ratio of remote operators is too low.
Well, there's two issues, right? One is this was citywide, right? So the remote operators can't deal with it when it's citywide because you're going to need to do it across a whole bunch of traffic lights. And as you say, the ratio won't work. The second challenge was the remote operators couldn't actually connect to the cars because the 5G network had gone down. Yeah. Right? And so the remote operators were useless anyway. So even if you'd have had one remote operator per car, you still wouldn't have been able to solve the problem because it didn't work. So there's a question for me about my suspicion is that what they had tested was, a number of traffic lights going down, perhaps in an area, but not necessarily such a wide area as this was done. And I don't think they'd anticipated at the same time that the 5G network would go down. And
which in a failure analysis, you go, well, what, the causes of the traffic signals going down, you would say power outage is one of them.
Yeah.
What else happens when there's a power outage?
Indeed. And I think it'll be interesting to watch the analysis. My suspicion is that they didn't think power outage would also mean telecoms outage, which it obviously does in this case. I think there'll be two things. One is I think Waymo will have to look at how it would deal with it if and when it happens again. And I think the regulators will get involved as well, because they'll want to know what your plans are and how you're going to test out what would happen if we did it again. And there might be some regulations that come off the back of it. Do they need to be satellite linked backups for this scenario? I don't know.
But there's also a fundamental failure in the people programming these to understand principles of driving. Like you don't just, if there's a blackout, people don't just stop. You need to rely on the onboard systems in order to get the vehicle either safely pulled to the side of the road. They didn't have a failure mode in them that said, if you lose communication and you don't know what to do, use the onboard sensors to do this.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is a more structural problem that Waymo has in terms of how it's thinking about these sorts of scenarios. And I think that is a deeper problem. Yeah. At the moment, I think it seems to have just taken we'll cross that bridge as and when it happens, perhaps rather than thinking adequately and in a very systematic way about how to deal with these types of exceptions.
Yeah, and I've been talking about autonomous vehicles for 10 years now. If you go back to that times, some of my predictions, such as my daughter's not needing driver's licenses because of autonomous cars, didn't come true. But they haven't needed driver's licenses because they've got the I will say Uber dad, but I'm not Uber. It's just that I drive them around a lot.
Yeah, the chauffeur dad.
Yes, yeah, the Uber of mum and dad. But I remember when a self-driving vehicle in Las Vegas ran over a homeless woman who was crossing mid-block with a shopping trolley with all her possessions in the middle of the night. So the autonomous car had been, which did have a safety observer on board at the time. The vehicle was programmed that pedestrians only crossed at crosswalks because that's what the rules said. And it didn't recognize that the woman pushing a trolley was an object. Yeah. So it did not brake at all. And that's because of its programming. Its programming didn't know what to do when there was something in the middle of a prescribed road, which had been, mapped to death by the, sorry, shouldn't use that word in this context, had been mapped to finite detail.
Yes.
And was a regular route. And so it didn't go, there's a new obstruction here, and it just drove straight into the person. And that's also been a feature of a lot of the crashes which are under litigation in America, of vehicles not recognizing objects on the road and running into vehicles, barriers which had been broken by a previous crash, or moved emergency services vehicles, because the failure mode wasn't it wasn't based on human loading, it was based on machine loading.
Yeah, my prediction is also that we will continue to see these types of safety incidents, okay, which a human would deal with very easily, the machines struggle to deal with. And I think there'll continue to be high-profile examples of this. Yeah. The question for me, though, will be, and it's difficult to know at the moment, I don't think we've got enough good research on that, but other than Waymo's data and analysis, which obviously you have to take with a pinch of salt, because they inevitably have significant vested interest in saying that they're significantly safer than human-driven cars. Now, you can argue whether or not they are safer or not at the system level. Okay. The thing I would say, though, is whereas I think that autonomous vehicles will get safer and safer in the years ahead, I don't think human drivers will. And so at some point, if they have not already, autonomous vehicles will become safer than human drivers.
Yeah. Well, in their favor, even the independent statistics show that they have a lot lower serious crash rate.
Yeah,
it's more. I suppose on one side, the regular crashes aren't occurring as much. Yeah. It's the ones where a human would actually behave normally would behave in a way that protects a life. They stand out, and and they'll continue to be newsworthy, and they'll continue to get high profile. But the question, but I think the vast majority of regulators will not want to throw the baby out with the bathwater in this scenario, going, well, autonomous vehicles are not safe, therefore we won't do them, because I think the evidence will mount that they are at a system level safer, even if they have these odd idiosyncrasies. Yeah. So I don't think it'll halt or even significantly slow the rollout of autonomous vehicles around the world. I mean, we've seen it start to speed up, especially in the second half of 2025. I think that will continue in 2026. The thing that I find most frustrating is that while I think there will be a lot of focus, rightly so, on the safety aspects of it, and there'll be a lot of focus on the technology aspects of it, I don't think there'll be any focus on the system-wide impacts of autonomous vehicles and getting on the front foot of properly integrating them into our transport systems in a way that is desirable. So, one of the blogs I'm going to write early next year is going to be around what I think our vision should be for autonomous vehicles in our transport systems, right? And what it should look like. Because what you get at the moment is the visions you get on what autonomous vehicles should look like in our transport systems is effectively ubiquitous autonomous vehicles, solving congestion and, making the whole world better, etc. And suddenly there's no public transport, there's nothing else, there's no cycling, etc. Everyone's just in a shared autonomous vehicle. Not in a shared one.
Right.
There's no money in a shared one.
Right, exactly. So the vision that is compelled by a lot of autonomous vehicle advocates, I think, is not a desirable future for all sorts of reasons. But I think that there are significant benefits we can get from autonomous vehicles, but we need an alternative vision to the autonomous vehicle advocate vision. We need one that's an advocate for better transport systems, and I think that's missing at the moment.
Yeah, it's really interesting with autonomous vehicles and them taking over the public realm. So you can have one argument, which sometimes in the past I've favoured, which is autonomous vehicles about making money. Bicycles, public transport, walking, freight deliveries all get in the way of that. So we'll have autonomous vehicles only lanes so that the vehicles can do as many trips as possible, which I can see. And going back to the 1980s, fencing off the pedestrian environment, because pedestrians will know they can just step out in front of these things and they will stop, particularly in low speed environments. Or they can carry a cone and just put the cone on top of the vehicle and make it freeze, which is a fun little spot in parts of America. It's just putting a safety cone on the front bonnet of the vehicle to see if it will freeze on it. So that's one side. So if the autonomous vehicle crowd move to flag fall is your big driver of income versus time or distance, then they'll want all the people out of the way because they want to be turning over trips. But if it's time or distance based and you're sitting there looking at your, you've got your Vision Pro Quest on and you're playing games in the back of it, and you've got a reliable travel time, then you probably don't care what the congestion level is. You want to get to your place on time, which works if it's a time based charging for the trip. So that it's going to be $5 and it's $5 and it takes 15 minutes. So you don't care what's going on out in the world. There could be the world could be going up in flames. So as long as you get to play your silly game on your virtual reality system, and so so long as you get to where you want to go on time, that's good enough. So if we can get them to move to that reliability based charging, then we can do things with the rest of the public realm.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's a large, I think that we can make autonomous vehicles help to improve our transport systems, right? And I think one of the things I feel we're just not thinking about, I think there's the utopian autonomous vehicle view. I've also seen sort of at the other end of the spectrum, which is like autonomous vehicles are just like cars or ICE cars or electric cars. They still destroy our cities, and that's right to an extent, but I don't think it's helpful in terms of understanding, unless you're going to say no cars for any of our cities and communities, which I think is way too far and an extreme position. I think you've got to be going, okay, so they're going to play a role in our transport system. What role do we want them to play? What is going to give us good outcomes from a whole range of different objectives that we have? Environmental, placemaking, productivity and economic. What is the role that we want them to play in order to and therefore how do we engineer our transport system, not engineer in terms of infrastructure necessarily, but just engineer in terms of rules, regulations, pricing mechanisms, etc., to deliver that vision that we want autonomous vehicles to play. And I think we need to have that. My personal view is if we don't have that vision very clearly soon, and we don't and therefore we can go, okay, this is what we want them to do, this is how we can do it, we will just end up with, like we did with the motor car, which will be kind of incremental change, and it will be happen in the wrong direction. So we'll end up with lots of people in single-use autonomous vehicles or single occupancy autonomous vehicles causing significant problems on our transport systems, but our response to that will end up being, hard engineering, lots of pick-up drop-off spaces for autonomous vehicles using the public realm, when we could be using that for a lot better purposes, to be honest.
Yeah, which is just the amplification of what's happening with the ride-hailing transportation network companies since they appeared on the scene. So, whereas taxis were, for all their flaws, they were much easier to regulate because they had to find waiting places if you wanted to get picked up on the side of the street. If the taxi was doing the wrong thing, it's very easy to identify the number plate and pass that off to the authorities. Whereas the ride hailing, it's very much at the moment it's there might be a sticker or a little magnetic thing in a window, and then when you get to fully self-driving, so at level 3 or level 4 self-driving vehicles, then you can set the rules, and then they should be following them. And it comes down to, I suppose, the strength and willpower of the people who control the streets to make sure that they are following them. So, the Austin, which is getting the second biggest rollout at the moment, will they take serious action if the robo taxis start picking people up or dropping them off in bike lanes, for instance, which we see happening? Is somebody says, I want to get out here, and the car just drives into the bike lane. So there's still very much that move fast and break things and screw the people that feel the consequences.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of lessons to learn from our limited successes and lots of failures when it came to ride hailing, and how we adapted our systems to those. But okay, so autonomous vehicles, I think we're expecting significant growth in that, not in the next year, not necessarily delivering great outcomes for our transport systems.
The rollout in China and Japan should be an interesting comparative study to the US, because I would expect that the governments of the cities that they're going to be in will not let them do whatever they want.
I think I'm not as sure about that. I think there's a lot of interest in promoting, certainly in China's case, their domestic industry. And I think that there'll be a lot of reluctance to regulate them as a consequence. But I think we'll start to see accumulating evidence of their impacts on things like congestion and inducing demand and those sorts of things. But I'm conscious of time, and we have already spent 20 minutes talking about autonomous vehicles. So let's move on and discuss bikelash. You've done huge amounts of work over many years on active transport. What's your thoughts on active on cycling in the last year?
Oh, look, so we are going through another period of bikelash. So where the rollout of bicycle infrastructure creates resentment and agitation because people feel like that they're having something taken away from them, whether it's car parking or traffic lanes or even things like modal filters where you close off part of a street and only bikes and walking and cycling can get through. So there's two aspects to it. One is the reactionary, I won't say conservatism, because it's not really conservatism of, no, we have to keep the spaces for the cars, and taking away this space will cause chaos. But there's also a little bit of a conspiracy theory aspect to it as well. Have you heard about the conspiracy theories about 15-minute cities, which popped up during COVID?
I have, yes.
Yeah.
I have to say, okay, so let's explain what the conspiracy theory is, and then I'll talk about. I have a slightly probably unusual perspective on it, but go on.
Okay. So the conspiracy theory is that so the concept of the 15-minute city is that you can get all your daily needs within a 15-minute walk or bicycle ride, and that's about health and density, and it comes from an urban planning concept. So at some point during COVID lockdowns, the COVID lockdowns plus 15-minute cities got tied together as this is going to be a way of controlling the population. Is once people have access to their daily needs within 15 minutes walk or cycle of their home, then we can lock all the people down permanently, and then you'll have to get a permit to leave your 15-minute area. So that's it at its most basic level. But improving access by cycling, including bike lanes, motor filters, as I discussed, is seen or just general traffic calming measures is seen as part of that conspiracy theory now.
So let me give you some thoughts on the 15-minute city, because I think you're right, it is a conspiracy theory. And the vast majority of advocates on 15-minute cities are not in this camp. But I have read some stuff from 15-minute city advocates, okay? And I'm a supporter of 15-minute cities as well, right? Or at least X-minute cities, depends on your context and stuff. But, right, I've read it and I've gone, I wouldn't support that, because they have sort of started to imply and use language which is about restricting people's freedom to travel.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They're a small minority, and they're at the extreme end. Okay, but some of these people are academics, and they come with the credentialized, they're professors and doctors and what have you. And when they do that, they create fuel for the conspiracies, because there is a group of people who are advocating for that, right? There is, they're coming often from an environmental lens, where they wish to reduce people's, ability to travel for environmental reasons. So yes, the conspiracy theory is there, and they've amplified that, but it's not as though there isn't fuel there, for creating that conspiracy theory. Now,
well, just let me say something else. I actually think 15-minute cities are nonsense. They are hopelessly impractical. The suggestion that we will have such tiny, compact cities that it completely ignores freedom of housing choice.
Yeah, and I also think that but I think there is. I mean, Sydney's planning, before it was thrown out, Sydney had a concept for a 30-minute city, right? Because it recognised that there was the 15-minute per city. Because for those that don't know, Sydney is a very low-density city by global standards, very spaced out, and so a 15-minute city was completely unrealistic in that context for vast swathes of the city. But I can see why. But I think for me, it's not a question of is it 15 minutes, is it 20 minutes, is it 30 minutes, etc. I think the important discipline is understanding what is it that people want to access. And I think one of the things we've been far too focused on in transport terms is the commute only, and not focused on people's much broader transport needs.
Yes.
So it's been very much, and I think that so one of the things I like about the 15-minute city concept, okay, or the X-minute city concept, is it gets you to think about both the transport and land use, not just one or the other, which is what we've been historically guilty of. And it also helps us to think about broader than just the commute, okay?
Yeah.
And recognizing the need to think about people's broader needs, not just their commute. So that's that. Whether or not you end up, whether it's, you know, you're engineering it so precisely for 15 minutes or not, I think is less here or there. I think the thinking behind it, the principles you're trying to achieve, are sound in that sense.
So the principle behind it is accessibility.
Yep.
So, and accessibility metrics are about how many of X can you reach within a certain time or certain distance. So it's not, so the big problem, and this is, you know, completely off the track from bikelash, but gonna keep it in.
We may have to change this topic from being bikelash to 15-minute cities.
No, we'll get to bikelash. So the access to your everyday needs. Well, you know, I don't want to go to the supermarket that's within my 10-minute walk because it doesn't have the range of the one that's within the 10-minute drive. So yay, I have a supermarket within a 15-minute walk, but that's not the one that I'm going to unless I just need milk. So the problem with 15-minute cities is that would be a tick, but having access to 5 supermarkets within a 10-minute drive, which is a 40-minute walk, a 25-minute bike ride, or even worse, a 25-minute bus ride, because of the really poor public transport system in my local area. That's actually what's important. It's the diversity of choice. You know, if you have one doctor, but your one doctor has to serve 15,000 people, but hey, they're all within 15 minutes of the one doctor. That doesn't actually do anything for anybody. So getting back to the bikelash aspect of it is, you know, and we've talked about this a lot, it is the people who feel they have something being taken away from them are very quick to anger and getting involved in the media, getting involved in the political side of things. And then they, you know, certain political parties will find that as an opportunity to, you know, we're going to give you back your parking lane or your traffic lane, and this pesky cycleway which has no cyclists on it, we're going to rip it out. And Montreal is a really interesting case in point, because the and I recommend people watch the Oh the Urbanity video. I'll put the link in the show notes on the new city government that's been elected. So they promised to rip out cycleways. The previous council had implemented a lot of good cycleways, a lot of which were staying, but they'd also delivered ones which were KPI focused, of hitting a certain number of kilometres being delivered. So they weren't necessarily connected. They weren't necessarily part of a well-functioning transport system. So you get two aspects of, you know, the bikelash, and bringing it back to the Sydney situation. When the Cross City Tunnel, which goes east-west under the centre of the Sydney CBD, was opened, part of that project was putting in a cycleway on each side of the road, and a bicycle lane, I should say, rather than a cycleway. And when it opened, they started doing the post-completion surface works on the day that it opened. Caused a lot of media political backlash. And then the then government went, we will create another traffic lane. And the easiest way to create a traffic lane was by taking out the two promised bicycle lanes and combining them together. So taking them from each side of the road, merging them together into a traffic lane. And that was a study in when you demand absolute perfection, which the two bike lanes have been, you can have unintended consequences of it actually created an opportunity to remove them because they were wide enough to create a traffic lane. So when I did the Sydney cycleways, all the designs were based around them not being really wide enough to convert back into a traffic lane, with the exception of College Street, which unfortunately when it was built was just wide enough to be converted back into a traffic lane. So we've seen this kind of thing all over the place. Currently, it's New Zealand and Quebec and Ontario in Canada where it's happening. But going back to our previous conversations about Paris and how the people in the city of Paris are happy, but the people who live outside the periphery are not about all of the work, I wouldn't be surprised to see if that becomes an issue in the next national election, for them to overrule the city of Paris and start taking control of some of the roads.
Yeah, I think let's put a pin on the Paris one, but I think you're right. I think because it looks like Marine Le Pen is hot favourite, I think, to be president in France. Last time I looked, the centre is collapsing in France. It looks like Marine Le Pen will be the next president, and I could certainly see that being a vibe to take on Paris. And
reform in the UK,
and the politics working for her now. Yeah. So let me put a pin on that, because for me there is a lot of stuff in here. Okay, so one of the problems we have is we have not worked hard enough at building a political consensus for cycling. Okay, so the vast majority of the arguments for cycling that I see, the language and the narrative that's used is the language of the left. So you're automatically alienating a significant proportion of people on the centre right who would be in favour of cycling. You are not working to convince those people and build a broader consensus. And there's no shortage of people who are widely recognised on the right who are pro-cycling. David Cameron, Boris Johnson, both big advocates for cycling in the UK, for example. Okay. In Boris's case, he certainly put his money where his mouth is, both in as London, but also as Prime Minister. And there was a lot of funding going into cycling lanes, etc., as part of that. So cycling, for me, overwhelmingly, we have made it far too one-sided. And you listen to left people and they go, "Oh, this is progressive policy," and they use the language of the left on cycling, and you're automatically alienating a large group, and that polarizes the debate far more than it needs to be. And so you end up with centre-right politicians, playing, we have not convinced enough of the centre-right because we've not used the arguments of the centre-right for why there's all sorts of good reasons. And I've written a blog about why active transport is really good from a conservative perspective as well, and a centre-right perspective. It's good in terms of economic growth. It's good in terms of reduced subsidy and reduced state, reduced taxation as well. There's a whole bunch of reasons why, from a conservative perspective, you should be in favour of active transport. But so that's problem number one. Problem number two, I think, is also there's lots of low-hanging fruit. So even if you don't have perhaps the political mandate for putting in dedicated cycle lanes along major corridors, I think there is a lot of low-hanging fruit we can do which is much easier politically and creates a much more pro-cycling environment that over time would enable you to do much more in terms of those bigger cycling routes, strategic cycling routes. So I'm thinking about, for example, there are a whole bunch of policies which are increasingly proven to improve walking and cycling to school, right? And over decades, we've seen a significant reduction in children walking and cycling to school. And there's a whole bunch of work that's been done by various people and various policies, often in isolation rather than combining, such as school streets, safer junctions, lower speeds, etc. Right, school buses, walking buses.
I worked on a safer routes to school program back in the early 2000s.
Yep.
Which was about making it safer to walk and cycle to school, and this program included individualized maps for parents and children's. It didn't do anything to address the issue, and I come from a different perspective on what works, because we know what works in terms of getting people walking and cycling is safety and separation from cars. So school streets are great around the school, but when you have low density urban environments with high average speeds on local streets, then parents who more often than not are drivers will say, no, I'm not letting my child.
Absolutely.
And I've done a lot of school projects.
But my point is,
yeah,
right, because is that what we often see in all of these things is isolated policies, right? So there's a paper just out that looked at 500 school streets across the UK, okay, and it led to a drum roll 6% increase in active and walking and cycling transport to school. 6%.
6% relative or absolute? So was it 6% of 2% increase, or was it from 2 to 8% of total motor?
Yeah, no, it was a 6% increase. I think it was from 2 to 8, if I remember correctly. Okay. Now
that's it, yeah.
Right, but even so, that's still relatively small numbers.
Yeah.
Right, but that didn't, but part of the problem is it didn't include all those other things that you're absolutely right that you need to take into account to get parents to make those decisions. Right? Do you have slower speeds? Do you have better quality infrastructure so that the junctions are safe? Segregated cycle lanes, etc. The reason I think those things are much easier to deliver in that context is politically it's a much easier sell for drivers, because most drivers know that the morning commute is made worse by the school run. They feel the difference between school holidays and non-school holidays.
Yeah.
Okay. And so if you explain to them that you're getting people off the street so that it feels more like the school holidays more times, they will understand that as a political narrative for you to say, this is why we're investing in walking and cycling. And the thing about that is when you do so it's not policy by policy for me. That's the problem, is that we're doing it in isolation because we're not good at going, let's have a comprehensive program, okay, for doing these things. And we're pulling 3 or 4 policy levers at the same time. Okay.
And another big one is how we build schools these days. So we don't build small schools that have walkable catchments. And
Yeah.
it's quite funny because Austroads, which is the body of the government transport agencies in Australia, has just released guidance on how to improve safety walking and cycling to school. And they don't talk about the land use planning problem.
Yeah.
Where we build big schools because that's efficient from a school perspective. Having big school means, you can have, one librarian rather than 4 librarians at 4 schools. But we don't build the population density that would make that actually walkable or cyclable, even with electric bikes. So, and parents end up driving their kids.
I 100% agree, right? And, that is, again, we don't integrate transport and land use, okay? And a key land use is schools.
Yeah,
right.
And
we
that's my prediction for 2026. We will continue not to integrate land use and transport.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think that's correct. And schools is a really good example. It's all very reactive. We're going to put the school here. It's going to be this size, and the consequences are we're going to need to upgrade the roads, etc. I remember I was involved in a conversation about the upgrades of roads around a school, and the upgrade for the roads was going to cost more than the school itself.
Yeah.
Just to accommodate the expected road traffic from the school. It was nuts. Completely, bizarre planning approach. But
so
but
getting back to bikelash,
was thinking, sorry, we got off the topic again. Yes, yeah. Going back to bikelash. So
yes,
what I think there's low-hanging fruit that we could do, and that was just an example around schools, that would create a much more proactive transport environment, which would then create much more support for cycle lanes, okay? So that when you did have a political leader who wanted to invest in cycle lanes along main corridors and take on the political challenge, and as you say, there would always be a very noisy crowd who will feel that they are losing, okay? What I think is very clear, though, in lots of places is that there has been, even when there's been very loud objections, there have been large groups, a silent majority of people who are supportive of the changes, and those politicians have often got re-elected. In fact, I'm not sure if I know any that have not got re-elected.
Well, the mayor in Montreal is.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
I don't know about the Montreal. Was it predominantly around the cycling that didn't get re-elected, or was there other issues on? I don't know.
I don't know. I only know the cycling part of it.
Yeah. So in terms of
but it was a prominent feature of the campaign, though.
Yeah. But it's common for those politicians to get re-elected in a number of places as well. There's lots of good examples, especially in Europe. But whether or not, so I think there is a lot more we could be doing in terms of building those foundations for a more pro-cycling culture, which would then enable us to have less of the wild swings between put bike lanes in and take them out kind of policy that we get to. And I think that's where, so yes, make hay when the sun is shining when you've got an Anne Hidalgo in Paris kind of style leader who's willing to, face up to the naysayers and put in significant bike lanes and take out the cars, etc. Great. The vast majority of politicians are not like that. So when those politicians are in place, what do? You don't just freeze and do nothing. What you want to be doing is getting in your foundational stuff that works for them politically, but also builds a longer term support for cycling. That would be my view. And I think we're just not, that's where I would go in terms of my cycling advocacy would be, tailor your advocacy for things that get you your long-term goals based around what the politicians are willing to do.
Yeah, and I think this comes to, I suppose, the people who become the advocates, and unless you become and this relates to anything, and unless you become a very, very large advocacy organization, your people are going to be volunteers, and they're volunteering because they have a reason and a passion for the topic area, and for them to step into the shoes of what could be their political opposition is a challenge for them. But if they do manage to create the type of messaging, then it may actually create an internal backlash within their advocacy group, who are then going, well, why aren't we just fighting for X, Y, or Z all the time? And won't be willing, there's always people out there who would, rather die in the ditch than mold to the political environment that they're working in.
Oh yeah. It's difficult for advocacy groups. I'm not saying it's, if let's be honest about it, if it was easy for the advocacy groups, we would have done this already, right? So, I recognize those challenges, and at some point we'll need to get one of the, someone who's done some great work in the advocacy space on this podcast to have a chat about what they've done and how they did it and what made them successful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
That's bikelash. So we expect not much progress, I think it's fair to say, in terms of active transport in the next 12 months. There'll be some good exemplars, but I think generally we're not expecting to see significant change.
I think we're in we're in the
downturn.
We're in the bikelash. Coming onto the bikelash phase of things, and there will be a few more years before the upswing. There's sunlight again, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's that. Right. Road user charging. Okay. So this year, at the beginning of the year, we saw New York implement its congestion charge, or it's, I can't remember what, congestion zone, decongestions. I don't know what they called it, but they've priced a part of Manhattan, haven't they?
Yes.
Okay.
The lower part. So yes.
Yeah, and there was a whole bunch of political shenanigans that have gone on over a couple of decades to get there, but New York has eventually got there, not on a price point that they originally intended, but I think a bit lower. But in terms of the outcomes that it seems to have delivered, it seems to have been as far as everything I've read, but perhaps I've only read one side of the story, is a universal success in the sense of congestion is down significantly in the area. Public transport ridership public buses speeds is up. Bus ridership and public transport ridership is up. The number of cyclists has gone up. The businesses in the local area have benefited as well. They were one of the biggest concerns was, would people stop visiting the area? But that seems to be quite the opposite. Business seems to be booming in the area as well. So it seems to have supported Broadway and the wider economy. I haven't seen anything which is emissions are down, pollution's down, it's much quieter. I haven't seen anything which has said it's having a negative impact, other than from people who just dislike the principle of charging for the roads. Have you seen anything in terms of?
You mean factual negative impact?
Yeah.
No, not really. I haven't seen much, but I mean, what hasn't been talked about is whether there's been an impact in the parts of Manhattan that are north of the area. So people who were previously driving in from New Jersey or Staten Island or Long Island and parking it within the area that's now in the congestion zone. I haven't seen anything about whether it's worsened congestion in there, in those places.
Okay.
And the effects on the Hudson crossings, so the tunnels and bridges, whether it's just
my understanding is
the problem north or not.
Yeah, my understanding was it was better, actually, that those things had improved as well, which was interesting. But that was I think there was, because there's just less people driving in now, that those had all benefited as well, even though they're not directly in the congestion zone. At least I think that's the data I saw. But I think it's generally is, other than there's questions about whether the federal government will intervene on the congestion zone, I think the general consensus has been it's been a success. And certainly the recent mayoral election didn't advocate for removing it. And it was, not certainly the mayor that won, Mamdani, hasn't, and that's not part of his campaign to remove it.
No, if anything, you'll take the money from the congestion payments and put it into his free buses program.
Well, how he's going to fund his free bus program if and when it happens is a different question. But we've also seen progress in New Zealand. So New Zealand has passed legislation to implement widespread road user charging across the islands. There's some details I think to be worked out through in terms of how they're going to actually implement it in local communities and local areas, and they're working through that at the moment. So there was progress there, and I think Auckland will be a place to watch in the next 12 months in terms of how they work out their plans around road user charging. The UK government has announced that it will charge for electric vehicles only from 2028, and only, I think, as a fixed sort of kilometer charge at the end of a year. So you'll just sort of say, this is how many miles I've driven this year, and therefore you're going to get charged a sort of flat rate depending on how much you've driven for your electric vehicle. So very crude kind of position, but it's a start. Yeah. And it's certainly an active debate in Australia. And I think if we saw, say, a New Zealand scheme being successfully implemented, I think that would probably add to momentum within Australia for an equivalent scheme.
So that's really interesting. So the High Court decision a couple of years ago now in Australia kiboshed any states doing it on a system-wide basis because it's considered an excise. So it will take the federal government to do it, and they've talked about it in the abstract rather than any specific, policy. I wonder whether this current government would have the courage to do that. And my answer is I don't think so.
I agree that the current Prime Minister won't have the courage to do it. I think he has only tried what I would say is one significant reform, structural reform to our systems, which I would classify as the Voice, and he lost that referendum. I think but at the same time, I clearly, my read is that the Treasurer is keen, and my read is that the states are relatively keen. So Victoria and New South Wales would both like to have proceeded with it.
Yeah.
So I think it's a one to watch. I think you're right. I think my lens at the moment is there isn't a lot of courage from this government. I think we're in an interesting political dynamic since in the last week or so anyway, off the back of the massacre at Bondi. And I think we'll just have to see how that plays out in terms of our politics as well. But I think in terms of globally, the reduction in fuel taxes generally is leading to an increased interest in road user charging. Not necessarily driven by the transport people, but certainly driven by treasurers and treasury departments. And I think that, so I think I wouldn't be surprised to see more announcements similar to the UK on that. I think what will be interesting is, will any jurisdiction take up a sort of smarter road user charging approach than the UK has done? So will it look to do a more, say, time of day and location based charging, which from a technological perspective, the technology is there but unproven, I think. Is that a fair way of describing it? Like conceptually people know how to do it, but it's not quite proven.
No, it's in the truck space.
Yeah.
So New Zealand was actually relatively easy for them because they've been doing it for trucks for quite a long period of time. So having So GPS based road user charging technically is actually quite simple politically, and actually just purely politically, because the economics of equity come into it. So are you driving between 7 and 9 a.m. in an area that has no public transport on a trip that has no feasible public transport alternative?
Yeah, but but isn't there a problem here in terms of, so with regards to vehicle fleets, they had somebody who learned how to install the GPS and put them into their fleets. Okay. The challenge is a very different logistical one when you're trying to get the public to either install a GPS tracker into their vehicles, and we're talking about a very wide range of different types of vehicles with different ways of connecting, and having to do that, and then making sure that they're properly used as well. So it is it's a different challenge. Like, the technology works, but as I say, it's like
it is, but it isn't. So if you have a car that's less than 10 years old, there's a good chance it's already reporting its telematics back to the car manufacturer, whether you know it or not. And there are data aggregators who use that information for predicting where crashes are likely to occur, congestion, all those type of things. If you want to sponsor us, please do. Then we'll mention your name. The information and the technology is there. It's not a hurdle. Singapore's Easy Pass system, you have to plug it into your car. Like, you cop a fine if you go through one of the gantries and your reader's not plugged in. So it's more. So the reason why places have the just report your number of kilometers per year is because it's easy.
The only place that's done that at the moment globally, the only country that's done it, is Iceland.
But it's easy. You just, when you do your vehicle registration, you say, this is how many kilometers I traveled in last year, and you get a bill for it. Or the people who do your vehicle inspection do that, and you can choose to pay. So in the Victorian case with electric vehicles, you can choose to pay quarterly. So that's the simplification, the dumbing it down to the easiest, most practical level, where you just say to everybody, we're going to charge you X cents per kilometer. Tell us how many kilometers you drove, and then if we think that you're a part of a worthy group, we'll rebate you at the end of it. And then the level of complexity and the ability to charge by time of day, etc., goes up from there. So you could just send everybody a toll tag, every registered vehicle a toll tag, and then charge them as they go through gantries on certain roads at certain times a day. And you can
but if you're going gantries based, it gets really expensive in terms of infrastructure.
It does get really expensive, but
you want to avoid the gantry solution, don't you? I mean,
the GPS and phone signal is your easiest technological way, but then it needs to have a power source.
Yeah, and the GPS on your phone, I'm told, is not as reliable as you'd like it to be for the system.
It's accurate enough for time of day charging. If you want to get into
I think the challenge is more like fraud and aspects like that, which I don't think is necessarily like, you drive your car with the phone switched off, how do you know that the person has gone?
Yeah.
Right. And so that's why I think like all of the solutions have got caveats around them. And that's why I say like it's conceptually there, but not necessarily. No one's proven it at scale yet. I think that's fair to say, but we'll have to see whether they do, whether one or more jurisdictions does try it.
Yeah.
It might be in New Zealand in a limited area to start with, looking at it. So I think it'll be interesting. But I think to summarize, in the next 12 months, I think we'll see more interest in this space. We'll see some progress in places like New Zealand. We might get to more details around how the UK is going to do it. And I think we'll see more people copying it. But that would be my take.
Yeah. So, and just going back to New York, so I did look up the data while we were talking. So the number of vehicles using the bridges and tunnels hasn't actually changed. So there's still 27 million vehicles a month and entering the island of Manhattan. So that means those vehicles are going somewhere.
Yes. Interesting.
Yeah. So, and if I've misread the stats, feel free to come back.
But to some extent, that maybe makes the argument for saying we should be increasing it from just the lower part of Manhattan to the next part of Manhattan, upper part of Manhattan.
Yeah.
Which I think is where some of the advocates are going anyway. If as long as they survive the federal government challenge. Yes.
Well, yeah, and the entire bus system speed is also flat. So the below 60th Street might be working really well, but the rest of New York's.
Yes. Although the new mayor is pledged to put in significant bus priority, I believe. So I think it will be an interesting space watching how that proceeds in the coming months and how quickly he's able to do it with all of the legal challenges that will inevitably come his way.
Well, yes, and the bus lane backlash.
Yes, which New York has got a history of.
Yes, yeah. Which is a good little prompt for episode 6 of our podcast, which is all about buses.
Yes, it was indeed.
And episode 4, where we talk about why transit lanes don't work.
Or why they haven't worked historically.
Yeah.
And how you might get them to work. Might.
Well, that would be my prediction, is that the transit lanes continue to not be great. Though I did meet some guys from New Zealand who have worked out a mechanism for enforcing transit lanes automatically, and it seems quite promising. So yeah, interesting.
That's worth an innovation keeping an eye on.
Yes, it's already operating in Auckland, so it's quite interesting. So still trying to get more information.
I'd love to see it being implemented in parts of Sydney. I think the political backlash would be significant. You'd have to manage the implementation very gently.
Yeah, I think that would be the case for anywhere. It's quite interesting because in Sydney, at least, the police used to have dedicated enforcement activity on transit lanes, which requires quite a number of people to do it, because you have to have one person who's the spotter, another one is pulling them over, and another one who's finding them.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
We need a much more automated way. Right.
Yes.
2026, I think we'll have to hope to see, we hope we're wrong and we see a lot more progress in a range of different areas. But thank you for listening. It was great to have you listening to us in the latter half of 2025, and I hope that you will listen and watch us in 2026. If you like what you're seeing, please like, subscribe, and if you fancy buying us a bus ticket or a train ticket on our Patreon account, it would be greatly appreciated.
And
thank you for talking to you, Graham.
Yeah, thank you, Russell. And please share it with people. There's, tens of thousands of transport professionals out there who may find something useful in what we talk about.
An excellent point.
Hope you have we're recording this before Christmas, so I hope you have a great Christmas and New Year's break, Russell. And
thank you very much. You too. See you in the new year.